This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Boy howdy, what a show we have in store for today. It's Grand Slam week for AEW at Arthur Ashe. Whatever that means. Guess it just means let's have an excuse to do a bunch of title matches since we only have about 48 belts we're working with right now. It's also the Friday edition, so you know what that means. Retro reviews. And we've got both for this week. NWA World Championship Wrestling and World Class Championship Wrestling. All of which we'll get into in a minute. And since I've been a little inconsistent with the show opening plugs, make sure that if you're watching here for the first time that you subscribe, like the show, and leave a comment down below to share your thoughts on everything or anything we talk about today. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report, and we're on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content. We've got retro content and current day content, all wrapped up on both shows. So whether you're an AEW fan, a WWE fan, an old school WWF fan, or lover of the territories, we cover it all here on the FSWR channel. And while I normally don't buy into the whole something for everyone mentality, it works better in podcast format than it does trying to operate a major wrestling company. AEW this week, speaking of the devil, it's pretty noteworthy. Not for anything going on behind the scenes. I'm primarily talking about the on-screen product, which is the only thing I really give a crap about at this stage. As fun as it is hearing about All Elite Wrestling having zero sense of locker room unity and everyone being divided into their own little subgroup or camps of friends, it is kind of at the point now where you just get sick of reading about grown adult men and women acting like petulant children, and you just want to try to watch a serious wrestling product for a change. And I know using AEW and serious in the same sentence is practically impossible, but I mean, you get my point. I'll at least say this before we run anything down or dive into the show. Dynamite has been a lot more tolerable in the last month or so. Like, there was a period back in the summer, pretty much starting from June all the way till post All Out, where this show was absolute dreck. You know, the injuries to the top guys, MJF being written off of television, the whole Forbidden Door thing, all the random crap happening on the show every week with nothing being explained properly. I mean, I could sit here for hours and run down the problems this show has had for the better part of 3 months now. With that said, the show's been better. Better in the sense of I haven't been struck with the urge to punt a hole through my television after it's over. And while I still have my ongoing issues with this show, at least I have MJF again to cover up for most of the bad stuff. You know, and even by that token, Tony seems to be cutting back a little more on the crash TV, random shit happening at once booking mentality. And it is a vast improvement. I will give it that. So let's get into this thing. Our opener was Chris Jericho versus Claudio Castanoli for the Ring of Honor World Championship. Okay, seriously, show of hands. Who else forgot that Claudio was the Ring of Honor World Champion? I can't be the only one. Who do you even win that belt from? Hold on, now I have to look this up because I'm curious. Sorry, poor planning, but I've got to find out. I'll just go to his wiki page to find out. That's probably the easiest. Claudio Castanoli. I know this is riveting viewing experience right now. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All Elite Wrestling and Return to Ring of Honor. Return to Ring of Honor. What return? The company exists by brand only right now. What is he returning to? Oh yeah, I forgot about this. Y'all remember how Claudio debuted for AEW? Forbidden Door. Not that I try to actively remember anything about that show. I totally forgot about that. Okay, skipping ahead. Oh, okay, here it is. In July 2022, Castanoli would make his return to Ring of Honor, which is now owned by AEW owner Tony Khan. At the ROH Death Before Dishonor pay-per-view event on July 23rd, Castanoli defeated Jonathan Gresham to win the ROH World Championship, capturing his first major singles world title of his career. Boy, that one probably stung by the time this match was over. Yeah, I forgot all about that. Does Jonathan Gresham even work for AEW anymore? I thought he quit. Anyhow. Good times. Good times. Yeah, not that any of that research mattered by the end of the day, because Claudio lost, which we'll get to in a minute. Of course, it's a Chris Jericho match, so evidently they're going to try and shoehorn a stupid angle in here for no discernible reason. And by the way, an angle that is strictly done to appeal to the marks because no one else would ever get the reference. They do a deal on the floor where Jericho grabs a hold of a guy in the front row who we had never seen on television or had been given any mention to prior. Turns out this man was Kerry Silken. And for 75% of the people out there watching asking, who the fuck is Kerry Silken? Well, good question. Apparently it wasn't important enough for them to tell us who Kerry Silken was 15 seconds prior to them shooting this completely pointless angle. But somehow we were supposed to care when Jericho shoved him onto the ground and started fake kicking him and fake punching him. All the while, once Claudio takes control and throws Jericho back into the ring, we see Silken in the background just casually getting back to his feet and calmly walking back to his seat. Right in front of the cameraman, by the way. He's totally fine. You know, just to let us all know this shit is fake, you see. By the way, in case you're wondering, Kerry Silken was the owner of Ring of Honor operations from 2004 to 2011, right before the Sinclair Broadcasting purchase. And Silken was mainly responsible for expanding ROH's network internationally and also helping them facilitate pay-per-view and television deals throughout that period. He was very instrumental in the growth and recognition of ROH's product on a more national scale. But of course, I guess we're all just supposed to know that. So you'll be shocked when I tell you that not a single person in the crowd gave a fuck when Jericho punched Silken and dropped him on the ground here 2 minutes into an opening match on AEW television. My guess is probably because most, if not the majority of these people, had probably never seen Kerry Silken in their life. Guaranteed they probably had heard the name a time or two, but if you asked them to pick him out of a police lineup, they probably wouldn't be able to do it. So my long-winded point, this is very dumb, and beyond a shadow of a doubt, a Chris Jericho idea, not that surprised, also made funnier by the fact that they do this angle a few minutes into the match, and after Jericho assaults a former ROH executive ringside for no reason, they just keep wrestling. Like nothing ever happened. Did we get a medical update on the conditioning of Kerry Silkin after Jericho assaulted this man on live national television? Nope. They just glossed right over it. So looking past that, Claudio's still the fucking man. It's a shame we only get to see the guy wrestle every third month of the year because the guy's super talented. You just never know it by the shitty way Tony books him. The finish was honestly kind of predictable, but I still ended up laughing by the end. Yes, for those of you that did not watch or still can't believe the sight of it after having watched it live, Chris Jericho is the new Ring of Honor World Champion. Whatever that means to you, if anything. Personally, I'm ambivalent about it. I've been ambivalent about practically anything and everything involving Ring of Honor since, well, long before Tony ever bought the company assets. But, even with the way they presented ROH on AEW television, I still haven't really cared about anything they've done with it. We see a bunch of guys carrying around Ring of Honor belts every week on this show, but at the end of the day, what does all that matter when we're sitting here in the fall of 2022 and we still don't really know what the hell Tony Khan's going to do with it? At this point, they can flip-flop belts to everyone on the AEW roster. It's not going to mean a damn thing. Maybe Jericho winning the world title is supposed to be a sign that they're coming closer to sealing some kind of television deal. I'm at the point now where I'm over the whole could, maybe, potentially discussion. I want to see some fucking action. Unless Tony or the announcers outright say at some point on Dynamite, ladies and gentlemen, Ring of Honor has found a new network or a new home to present weekly television from. I don't give a fuck who they pass the belts off to, because none of them mean a goddamn thing right now to begin with. Sorry, not sorry. It's the way I see it. And I promise you, I'm not in the minority with that. And for the record, too, Chris Jericho representing the Ring of Honor brand as the heel world champion gives me zero signs of hope for that future television program. Not after having to watch Jericho for the better part of 2 years suck the life and energy out of virtually everything he's been involved with on AEW. There isn't a single person that's worked a program with him in the last 2.5 years that's come out on the other end looking good. And we can run the full gamut if you really want to, but when MJF, of all people, doesn't come out better for having worked with the guy, you fucked up somewhere along the way. So, some people will probably crap on this. Others will probably see it as a sign of hope that we get some further clarification on the future status of Ring of Honor. I'm still on the boat of, until they officially announce something on television, I still don't care. Moving ahead here, though. Well, that was a real roller coaster ride of emotion. So this Swerve in Our Glory acclaimed tag title match. Round 2. Had a lot of thoughts running through my head during and after this match. And it's one of those rare instances where I found myself having a great deal of trouble collecting my thoughts as to how I wanted to present it. First, let me share some of my notes on the match, and then I'll get to the bigger picture. Okay, look. I know the business has evolved, and I know we've kind of done away with the whole face-heel dynamic in wrestling. But for Christ's sake, if you want people to care, and you want to be seen as more than just a guy that can do a lot of impressive athletic shit, you need to be a character. You need to work a role on television, whether that role is portraying you as a good guy or a bad guy. And in the case of Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland, after that all-out match where the fans totally healed them by the end because they wanted the Acclaim to win the strap so badly, I'm sorry to say this, there's no excuse for Keith and Swerve not to run with that. There was no excuse for them to try and work a babyface style in this match, and I don't care what anyone says. And I'll tell you why. Because what happens when you've got Keith and Swerve doing a bunch of crowd-pleasing offense that's designed to get a pop out of them? Ding dong, newsflash morons. You end up detracting from the guys that should be getting all the babyface pops, the Acclaimed. Why am I watching Keith Lee do a head scissor takeover spot on Anthony Bowens when it's totally uncalled for? And it's not something a heel would ever do in a wrestling match, much less a big mean-looking smug prick like Keith Lee? That legitimately pissed me off. Fuck Keith Lee for going into business for himself like that when he should know better. This was not the time or place to try and do a babyface versus babyface match, especially after what we already saw at the pay-per-view with these teams. This was the time to do what's right for business, work the heel-face dynamic, give the Acclaimed every opportunity to shine while Lee and Swerve worked as full-fledged heels so that they could set up the title change at the end and it would have had a bigger impact. All Keith did here was split the crowd and take away from the meaning and story of the title match. So he's a piece of shit. The other thing I noted here was the general sloppiness from both teams, and maybe it was just because I got caught up in the emotion from the pay-per-view match where I was able to overlook some of the choppiness of the work from both teams, but it was really noticeable here. And I know Caster and Bowens are still pretty green as workers, so I don't want to run them up the flagpole too much, but the chemistry they had from the pay-per-view just really didn't seem to click here on television for one reason or another. And it's like, I don't know. I'm conflicted. Because on the one hand, the only thing I really cared about here was seeing the Acclaimed win the straps. But on the other hand, after the way it was executed, did they miss the boat by not putting the belts on the Acclaimed at the pay-per-view when they should have? I don't know. The match, like I said, I didn't really think was all that good, and there were multiple times throughout the match where guys were interchangeably coming in and out of the ring without tags. Once again, I should always come to expect this when that fucking Rick Knox clown is officiating. God, that egg-headed geek is rotten. Someone needs to fire that idiot because God is he horrible at his job. And even when Caster and Bowens won at the end, yes, it got a pop, but I never felt the match had the emotional investment from the fans like it did when they were in Chicago. And again, I partly fault Keith and Swerve for not working the match as heels when they should have. Instead they wrestled the indie mentality of trying to get their shit in. So it ended up being face versus face when the story didn't call for it after everything that happened at the pay-per-view. But, on the other hand, it's almost like the fans expected there to be a title change here because they knew Tony blew the call by keeping the belts on Keith and Swerve at the pay-per-view and the crowd really wanted to see the Acclaimed win. So you fast forward a couple weeks later and it's like, the expectation for the title switch is already there. So while it did get a big hoorah at the end, it wasn't any kind of tear-jerking reaction like, holy shit, I can't believe it. Like, does that make sense? Am I explaining this well enough, or is it just the cynic in me talking? I don't know. When you factor in the predictability of it and the fact that the match was nowhere near as good as the pay-per-view match, the only thing you really had to latch onto was the finish. So, I'll see where it goes. They made the right call by putting the belts on them. I would love to think that Tony will keep featuring them on television consistently and not bury them into the background like he does with a lot of other hot acts. The worst possible thing for Tony to do is not capitalize on the momentum now that they actually have the belts. Because it's one thing to do the title switch, but now you actually have to do something with it. Otherwise, people will start souring on them. Speaking of souring on guys, here's something that never should have seen the light of day. Wheeler Yuta in front of a live microphone. God damn. Talk about hanging a guy on the laundry line by his nutsack. And of course, they didn't do the poor sap any favors when they threw MJF out there to completely mop the floor with him. Verbally and physically, as we found out later on. And MJF basically spouted a bunch of cold hard truths at Wheels here. Said he'll never get a pop like the one MJF got. True. Said Yuta's a low-hanging fruit in AEW. True. Says most men in the crowd love him so much they would let their wives sleep with him. And even so, he probably wouldn't sleep with them anyway because he has standards. Babyface pop for that line, by the way. So you can tell none of these dudes get laid. So, yeah, this heel thing with MJF. I'm noticing it's starting to become a bit of a problem. You know, it's actually one of the more interesting conversations I think a lot of us should be having right now. Whether or not running with MJF as a babyface would be the smart thing to do. Because on the one hand, he's such a goddamn great heel, but on the other hand, I mean, dude, look at the reaction he's getting. This has totally surpassed heel Ric Flair and the heel Horseman getting babyface pops on Saturday Night Superstation in front of 100 people. This is thousands upon thousands of people that are actively partaking in the role of MJF's devil worshippers. You know, whereas a couple weeks ago, MJF was able to surreptitiously work the fans into cheering him early on, only to get them to hate him by the end of the segment, that didn't happen here. You know, because the people very quickly caught on to the fact that Yuta is about as exciting to listen to as TV static when it comes to promo time, and especially when they have him and MJF going back and forth. And after Yuta practically embarrassed himself on the mic here, he didn't do himself any favors by getting the people to cheer for him. It was especially funny when Yuta was talking about MJF's fiancée, saying she's catching on to the fact that Max is nothing more than a spineless, gutless coward. Meanwhile, the New York fans are showering this fucker with booze. Yuta just digging himself into a deeper grave the more he kept flapping his gums here. And then, of course, MJF's one-liner immediately puts him to shame when he says, "Congrats, Wheels. You've gone from dry paint to pet rock personality." And, of course, everyone cheers. So, long story short, they pretty much left Yuta limp dick here by the end. And it culminated with MJF getting sucker punched after dropping a line about William Regal popping pills. And they brawled on the floor for a minute. And then Wardlow 2.0 ran out to try and make the save for MJF. For those that don't know, that would be W. Morrissey. And, well, the people also booed Yuta when he got on offense over MJF. But that was to be expected. They did the little pull apart at the end, which resulted in fake security guys running out and throwing up their arms as if to say, "Please, no more fighting." Yeah, they were all about as intimidating as newborn pups. Totally useless. So, I guess I do have to question the idea of this trying to be designed to get Wheeler Yuta over in any way. Because if that was the design, then yeah, I think it's fair to say that failed. But the one good takeaway from this, guess we'll actually get to see MJF wrestle on television again. First time in, 6 months? Even though it's against someone in the Black Hole Charisma Club, at least it's MJF wrestling. So I'll take what I can get. So at this point, we got this mid-Atlantic, some of the Atlantic, but not all Atlantic title match with Pac and the company mascot. Another case of guys carrying around belts on this show, and I had no idea it was a thing. Has Pac ever defended that belt once on Dynamite prior to this match? If so, I would love to know, because I totally forgot that belt was a thing. And of course, the one time he does defend the belt on Dynamite, it's against a fucking geek that looks like he ought to be sitting shotgun in the towing service. Not even the guy that drives the truck, because even this idiot doesn't deserve that much credit. He'd be the one sitting in the passenger seat not doing anything. Oh, God. No. Not happening. I am officially in boycott mode for anything that involves Cassidy or the best friends on this show. I'm over it. I'm over him. I'm over the act. I'm not even going to subject myself to it anymore. I caught the tail end of it where Pac hit Cassidy in the head with the ring bell hammer and pinned him. Good for him. I also skipped over this 4-way women's match. 1, because it's another goddamn 4-way. And 2, it was a girls' 4-way, which spelled disaster for myself and all parties involved. Did they literally not just do a 4-way girls match on TV last week? Or was that the pay-per-view? I can't even remember. However, I did catch the afterbirth. And, I won't take away from the pop she got. This, I'd actually go on record by saying this was probably the first female to debut for AEW that has gotten this level of reaction when she came out. You know, the people popped for Athena and Toni Storm when they first showed up, but it was nowhere near the level of pop this woman got. And I'm, of course, talking about the former Paige of WWE fame, now going by, I believe, her birth name, Saraya. And I guess the first place to start is with the obvious question. Has she been officially cleared to return to the ring? Because she's been retired from in-ring competition for, God, how long has it been? Like 4 years now? You know, I know WWE kept her around for a couple years afterwards, but I know she's been through a series of health complications in the last several years. I guess my concern out of the gate with putting her back in the ring is the risk really worth the potential reward? Here's what I'll say about it. And I'm going to remove my personal opinions on Paige for a minute because while I've never been a particular fan of hers, I can at least recognize that she was a very instrumental part of revitalizing WWE's female division in the last decade. You know, she's helped to move the needle in terms of gaining the women more recognition from an in-ring standpoint, whereas we sort of know WWE's track record when it comes to pushing female talent over the years. Let's just say, for sake of argument, their in-ring skill wasn't usually seen as the primary appeal. And she's obviously been an inspiration for a lot of the female talent we see WWE pushing right now when it comes to girls like Becky Lynch or Bayley or even Charlotte. You know, they all worked with Paige. They saw the foundation that she helped lay, and they've tried to take that momentum and run with it. And specifically when it comes to AEW's female division, I am not the only one that has had this opinion for a long time now, since AEW first started. I never saw the point in AEW having a women's division. I didn't think they had the star power or the ring credibility to be able to carry a full functioning girls division, you know, especially with the competition that they're working with in the men's division. And for the better part of 3 years, yes, we've seen girls like Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa and Serena Deeb come into the fold, but are they household names or recognizable stars like Saraya Knight? No. You know, this is actually a bigger deal than I think a lot of people might be giving it credit for. Because unlike girls like Toni Storm and Athena who jumped ship from WWE earlier this year, sorry to say it, but Toni and Athena are just another set of girls. Saraya is not just another girl. Like, she's an actual former star with name appeal. Someone that traces back a little bit in WWE history where some people might catch on to the fact that she's with AEW now and they might show general interest to see what happens. You know, and if she's actually going to work programs and be involved from an in-ring standpoint, AEW might actually have something here. Like I said, I was never a particular fan of her work in WWE. Most of that might be the fault of the way they presented her and booked her, but the height of her popularity was when she was being pushed alongside girls like AJ Lee, who I was also not an advocate of. Sorry, Punk, but not my flavor. And To my knowledge, even when Paige was being pushed as a top female star, it was still under the old Divas banner. But her being presented in a different environment with a fresh coat of paint after all that time off, they might actually have something here. Again, she's right up there with a list of notable WWE names with the likes of Becky Lynch, like that type of name value. Someone that if they rocket ship pushed into winning the women's title, they could actually make a big program with her and Thunder Rosa when she comes back. I might actually invest in doing something like that if I were Tony Khan. No offense to Tony Storm, but if I have the opportunity to make some real money off a women's program right now, and I have to choose between Tony versus Rosa or Saraya versus Rosa, I'm taking Saraya versus Rosa, no doubt. And Tony would be a fucking idiot not to. Now, of course, I have no faith that he'll actually do that because he has a reputation for fucking up any good opportunity he's presented with, but those are my thoughts. But I am actually interested to see what they do with Saraya Knight in AEW, and that's probably the highest praise I've given AEW's women's division in a long time. So I'm hooked, at least temporarily. So, after glossing over several other segments that took us to the main event, it is the finals of the AEW World Championship Tournament, Jon Moxley versus Bryan Danielson, with MJF in the skybox watching. And they let us know at least 17 times during this match, just in case we weren't paying attention or something. By far, he was the highlight of this entire segment. Watching these guys take all these heavy bumps and beating the snot out of each other. He's just casually kicking back thinking, man, it's going to be great getting 20 more years of mileage out of my career by not taking any of these stupid bumps. So, well, remember last week when I joked about how they've made it so transparent that Moxley was going to win this tournament? You almost had to expect them to go in the other direction by having Danielson win. Well, guess what direction they didn't go? Yeah. And at the end of the day, I'm not all that shocked by it. I sort of left the Danielson train station a long time ago, and if he's ever a guy that epitomizes missed opportunities in AEW, dude, I could write a book on how badly Tony Khan has fucked up Bryan Danielson in AEW in the last year. And it's so bad at this point, quite frankly, I don't even know if putting the world title on him would have made a difference. And I could spend time talking about the match, but did it really matter at the end of the day? First of all, it's babyface versus babyface. Again. So you're automatically splitting the crowd 50-50 and making it impossible for anyone to get emotionally invested in one guy. Not that the AEW crowd cares about that anyway. I'll tell you this, and again, maybe it's the old jaded wrestling fan in me talking, but am I the only one that's kind of over the whole 50-50 back and forth match where no one gets heat? Where nobody's really working over a body part for an extended period of time? There's no drama or story going on throughout the match. It's like, it really hit me here. Like I'm watching the match, and they're doing stuff. It's pretty even Steven in terms of exchanging moves. There's not a whole lot of excitement value because there's really no one to cheer or boo. So I got bored. And I kind of tuned the match out at various points. In the back of my head, I guess I was kind of hoping Danielson would win because I like the idea of a Danielson MJF title program over a Moxley MJF title program. But was it enough for me to care about the end result when Danielson didn't win? No. It was like, okay, Moxley won with the Bulldog choke. He's a 3-time world champion now. Great. We can sit here and debate whether or not the wrong guy won until we're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, I've got to ask, what does Danielson winning the title at this stage really mean? Most people, I think, are expecting MJF to win the belt pretty soon anyway, so does Danielson as a short-term babyface world champion really matter if his reign only lasts a month? Maybe just to see the visual of Danielson holding the AEW strap, but again, how much does it really mean? On the other hand, I can understand the argument of Danielson being kind of injury-prone at this state and Tony Khan not wanting to risk putting the world title on another guy who he can't trust to stay healthy. I totally get it. I don't like Moxley's herky-jerky ring style, and I never will, but at least we've kind of established that the guy can stay healthy. But that's kind of where I stand with the whole thing. I think Danielson is well past the point of return from a booking standpoint. I don't know how you can salvage it at this point. I mean, even if you send him away from TV and bring him back in a few months, I just don't think it would make a difference. They've kind of booked him into mid-card obscurity at this point, and he's just another dude. And I know a lot of Bryan Danielson fans out there might not like hearing that. The AEW marks might try and see it in a different light, but let me pose the question this way, and this will probably kind of be a better way to identify the issue. Would you say that Bryan Danielson matters now in AEW compared to where he mattered a year ago when he first showed up? Does he have the same value? Does he have the same appeal? I really pose that question. Does he mean anything to the company now than he did, say, 12 months ago? I think you're kidding yourself if you say the answer is yes, but, I mean, you're free to continue to live in that fantasy. Moxley being back on top as the world champion, probably just end up being another transitional champion to drop it to MJF in a month or so. It's kind of a shitty reputation to have as the world champion in AEW, being the transitional backup guy because the initial guy you had planned for that spot wasn't reliable enough to stay healthy and carry it out. But, hey, I guess some people are all right in that role, being the bit player or the second choice, but hey, whatever. Moxley's getting paid. What does he care? More power to him. So there you have it. Like I said at the beginning, the show has been a lot better than it has been in the past few months. There's stuff that I actively skip over still, but it's fewer and far between as compared to where we were in the deep summer of this year, where I had virtually nothing to latch onto that kept my interest, aside from the occasional FTR match. MJF makes all the difference in the world, and at least I have him to even things out, and even if I'm not stoked about his next program involving the oil mechanic, if the end goal is to get the world strap on him, I'll deal with it.
What are you smiling about? I don't have to listen to this stuff. I'm saying that my boys can beat your boys any day of the week. If you're so sure that those two big, ugly idiots can beat my men, and why don't you sign a contract, put them in the ring, and we'll settle the whole thing once and for all, because I know that my boys can win. Don't put your finger in my face, boy. Mr. Cornette, if nature hadn't saw fit to put something that wasn't in your head, I'd put it in there right now and right here. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Ellering. I think your boys are a couple of geeks, and I think that if you took your brains and stuck them up a nut's rear end, they'd rattle around like a BB in a boxcar. Did I tell him or what, huh?
Well then, that all escalated rather quickly. I actually forgot about that legendary corny quote too. I'm glad he brought it up here. Oh, and by the way, Tony Schiavone's face during that whole exchange, priceless. That guy had a front row ticket to pro wrestling at its peak every week around that time. What a gig. So, well, with that said, it was a good precursor to David Crockett and Tony Schiavone running down the gauntlet for the show. Obviously, things are still kind of centered around the U.S. Tag Title Tournament, and right now they're really hard selling the potential blow-off between the Road Warriors and the Midnights. They also informed us that they had some footage to show following that little teaser with Ellering and Corny from the start. A rare moment in the record books where we actually saw a tag team get heat on the Road Warriors. So you know right off the bat, shit went down. And on the subject of the tournament, they brought in Bill Dundee and Buddy Landel for a quick promo. Dundee doing his best Ben Shapiro impersonation and firing off about 100 different things at light speed. Unfortunately, Peacock does not have a function to slow down audio, so I did my best to keep up with him here. Here's what I got out of Dundee's promo. Something about Brad Armstrong in the TV title, something about Magnum TA getting beat up by the Russians, and they vowed to win the U.S. Tag Team titles. There was also a point where Dundee started calling out Dusty Rhodes and made reference to a joke he apparently made on TV at some point, that he was going to stuff Bill Dundee into a microwave and make him disappear. I presume that was a size joke. And Landel actually didn't have a whole lot to add here, aside from him continuing to take shots at Ric Flair for a program that never saw the light of day. So that took us to our first match. It is Baron Von Raschke versus Tom Barrett. They wrestled for about 3 minutes and Baron won with the claw. I had literally nothing else to note about it. Mostly because I don't really have anything to say about the Baron at this point. The only other notable thing here is the mention that Ravishing Rick Rude will soon be making his way to the NWA, apparently as part of Paul Jones's army, which I had no recollection of ever happening. Only thing I ever remembered about Rick Rude in the NWA is him teaming with Manny Fernandez in '87, where somehow they ended up winning the World Tag Team Championships. And we'll obviously cover it in more detail once we get there, but yeah, that was a thing. Y'all remember the Ragin' Bull Manny Fernandez? The guy who has completely disappeared from this program in recent weeks and we have not heard a peep out of? Yeah, well, that guy ends up winning one half of the World Tag Team Championships in a few months. Crazy stuff. So that was followed with a chaffed-ass Jim Cornette promo. And he's raging, he's fuming, he's ranting and spitting at what transpired with the Midnights and the Road Warriors from earlier on. Says that Paul Ellering found out firsthand that his precious Road Warriors aren't so unbeatable when they mess around with the wrong men. Says there's no way the Road Warriors are going to be able to work the U.S. Tag Title Tournament now because Animal is out, thanks to beautiful Bobby and Loverboy Dennis. And he makes a promise that someday the Midnights are going to take out Hawk too, which will leave Ellering prone and vulnerable so that Cornette can slap him silly. And, you know, it's funny. I'm watching Corny go on this tirade here, and the only thing I thought when it was over, you think MJF has watched a lot of Cornette tapes when he was a young lad? Call it a hunch, but I think there are some ties there. So we come back from break for a Ric Flair promo, and guess who's with him? The one and only Baby Doll. You're correct. Yeah, remember a couple weeks ago when I insinuated that one promo she did sounded like a TV write-off? The one where she was talking about how she was taking the warlord to the Central States to teach everyone a lesson? Well, apparently I jumped the gun a little bit there because here she was, plain as day, decked out in all gold, which was quite the attire. And while Flair's got a bone to pick with Dusty here, they actually didn't touch on this at the beginning of the show, so I was confused when Flair brought this up. But apparently Dusty had recently beaten Arn to win the television championship. And of course, Flair's talking about how it was a grave miscarriage of justice in the way that Dusty won the belt. Took some shots at Magnum here, saying he'd rather play with his toy motorcycle as opposed to playing with a real woman, which you can interpret in a couple different ways, but I just interpret it as Magnum chasing his passions and hobbies. And if his motorcycle is more important to him than women, I don't really see what's wrong with that. So, Flair took some shots at Nikita Koloff here, too. Still planting the seeds for that unexpected feud come Starrcade. And then he wrapped up by promising he was going to wipe the floor with Dusty in the various cities they were going to be visiting. Also said he was going to give all these sexually deprived women a taste of what a real man is like. Meanwhile, there's Baby Doll standing inches next to him, just smiling at the camera like it's no problem. She knows. Then we went to the Rock and Roll Express taking on Gene Ligon and Mike Samani, who I legitimately misspelled in my notes as Mike Salami. I was kind of hungry. Or at least I was until I saw Samani's hairy chest. Ricky and Robert actually got a little bit more time here to work with. They worked over both guys, sort of played with their food, for lack of better terms. Of course, they won with the usual double drop kick, which David Crockett never hesitates to mark out for. God, if only he was around the business to see all the cartwheel stunts and all the crap the boys would be doing 30 years later. I don't even want to imagine how he'd respond to all that. So that took us back to the booth with Magnum and Dusty, and, well, I guess they decided to go full-blown hipster for this promo. They had the cool shades, Magnum's decked out in his denim jacket, Dusty's got the charcoal blazer on, getting their swag on. And they did a super fiery promo here, particularly Dusty. Magnum just kind of riffed on the competition in the title tournament, saying him and Dusty were slated to win the U.S. titles. And then Dusty got on the stick and talked about how America's team has always promised that if they want something, they take it. They want the world title, they take it. They want the TV title, they take it. And they want the U.S. tag title, so by cracky, they're going to take it. Right before they cut away, Dusty told Tully Blanchard that he's got a beef to settle with him, promises to maim and cripple him before they're through. Would have been better if he said, I'm going to maim you, I'm going to cripple you, but I won't be paying the medical bill. But, yeah, it was a good old-fashioned Dusty promo. Tell you, say what you want about Dusty back in the day. He definitely had his flaws, but when that guy was on his game, he fired on all cylinders. And that segued right into JJ and Tully after the break. JJ was sporting a couple face bandages here, so he was either covering up for some bruising or apparently he got a little excited with the shaving razor. Anyhow, he basically recapped Dusty's promo and said that he and Tully hear him loud and clear that he's coming for them and he wants to hurt Tully. And they're planning to keep their heads on a swivel, not because they're scared, but, well, they just want to take precautionary measures, all. And that makes sense, right? I mean, you have a guy claiming he plans on committing first-degree murder on you on live national television. I mean, I'd probably look over my shoulder a time or two just to be sure. You never know. That, of course, was the perfect transition for Tully to chime in and talk about how Dusty can preach about trying to psych all the horsemen out all he wants. But who is it that beat Dusty for the TV title back in the spring? Moi. Who is it that crippled Dusty a year and a half ago and rendered him unable to compete, let alone stand on 2 feet? Moi. Huh. And if Dusty thinks that Tully's going to stand up here on live television in his $700 shoes and $500 custom suit and quiver in fear, he's got another thing coming, brother. And then JJ smiled at Tully and they totally blew this off like no big deal. God, I love these two. You know, now that I think about it, these guys actually might be the two consistently great promos of the entire year 1986. Every single time we get a Tully JJ promo, these guys are just phenomenal. And you could tell it is so effortless with their delivery, too. They don't have to overthink anything. They don't have to handwrite shit down on a piece of paper and try to recite it in their head the moment before saying it. They just go out there, do their shit, and walk off with a smile on their face. Absolutely brilliant. So that took us to Arn Anderson versus Jack Jackson. Not making that name up, by the way. Apparently, Jackson's parents were lazy and couldn't think of another first name to come up with, so they went with the obvious. Jack. Something else tells me Jack Jackson wasn't bred for the business anyway, because Arn killed this poor motherfucker. He lived up to his moniker of Armed Anderson 20 years before it was popularized in AEW. Just beat and beat and beat on this poor bastard. And the funny thing is, the crowd cheered him while doing so. There was a very southern guy in the crowd that pretty much admonished Jackson at every turn here. There's a point where Arn's got him cranked in an armbar, and the guy with one of the deepest southern accents you've ever heard goes, "What's wrong, boy? You ain't man enough to stand up?" All the while, Arn's just paintbrushing the guy and swiping at his face. Guy's totally helpless. I did like the one guy in the crowd that tried heckling Arn toward the end, and Arn just shut him down immediately by going, "Shut up, boy." And he shut him up. No doubt about that. And finally at the end, Arn hit Jackson with the double-A spine buster and then put him away with a nasty-looking gourd buster. And then he followed with a 5-star promo, standing there talking about how he doesn't like hurting guys to make an example out of them, but it had to be done. Says that any athlete in the world knows that pain starts in the gut, and it's all about recognizing it and pushing through the pain. Says that week in and week out, he defended the world's television title against the best of the best. Talks about having to qualify to even be a member of the Four Horsemen. That is how much Arn had to grind to get in. So for Dusty to come out here and have the gall to insinuate that Arn doesn't belong in the Four Horsemen after one cheap shot victory over him, he's got a lot of nerve. Tells Dusty that he may have a temporary meal ticket, but it is still 4-on-1 when it comes down to the Horseman advantage over Dusty. And he promises that their mission is to rid Dusty of the sport of wrestling by the end of '86, and they will live up to their word. And to think that there are actually empty-headed dumb fucks in AEW that have great minds like Arn Anderson hanging around. And they don't see the appeal in taking advice from guys like him. Fascinating. And speaking of great minds that the young guys could benefit from learning a thing or two from, Jim Cornette was back out. And he brought Dennis and Bobby with him so they could show the full clip of what went down with the Road Warriors from earlier on. Starting with Corny at the booth putting over his boys and basically affirming that the Midnights were slated to win the U.S. tag titles. And it's kind of rolling along like a normal Midnight heel promo, right up until the point Corny starts firing off some shots at the Road Warriors. And he's been putting his foot in his mouth for a while now by calling out the Legion of Doom on television, essentially calling them a bunch of muscle-bound meatheads every week. So at this point, Paul Ellering has heard enough. He comes out and gets in Cornette's face, tells him the only reason the Midnights are soaring high right now is because Animal and Hawk threw them high into the air and sent them crashing down to the mat. And we already touched on this bit earlier, but this is where Corny got a little too comfortable going toe-to-toe with Precious Paul, so Paul slapped Corny across the face. And he laid that one in too. Corny took a great bump for it. Wasn't as legendary as the Mid-South angle from '83 when Bill Watts slapped Cornette in the face and sent him ass over tea kettle as a shoot, but Still a pretty great bump. So they cut to a scheduled Road Warriors match from earlier in the day against two job guys, wherein during the match, the Midnights all ran out to attack the Legion of Doom. Cornette hit Ellering in the back with his tennis racket, and while Hawk was busy tussling with Condrey out on the floor, Cornette and Bobby were in the ring getting ready to lay out Animal. And this is actually a very famous television moment here, where Corny whacks Animal in the back with his supposed loaded racket, and Animal takes the pratfall immediately onto his stomach and face, essentially knocked him out cold right there. Of course, that's when you have Bobby driving the knee into his back off the top rope. So their big angle here is that the Midnights are responsible for being the first team in 4 years to put the Road Warriors out of commission because nobody was big enough and bad enough to get the job done. Many have tried, all have failed, up to this point. And, if you think about it, this is actually a testament to how well in advance wrestling promoters used to actually think about the longevity of characters back in the day, especially Hawk and Animal as a team. With the way Dusty booked in the NWA, his goal from day one was to make sure that nobody got heat on the Road Warriors at any point. So when they finally shot the big money angle here with the Midnights, there was meaning to it. Because it's one thing to see the Road Warriors get taken down in a segment or match. Normally they'd fire right back up and then make their comeback almost instantly. But not here. No, this angle was explicitly done so Animal could be put on the shelf for a period of time. And Dusty always knew that the one heel team that he could do this with that would be believable and draw money, it was the Midnight Express. So this is all really well done. And Dennis Condrey actually cut a great heel promo here too. It's actually easy to forget how great of a promo Condrey actually was back in the day. Problem is we don't see him talk too much on these studio shows because they got Cornette as the mouthpiece, but Condrey was a fucking dynamite promo in his heyday. Go back and watch some of his Memphis work if you don't believe me. That guy could talk. So, this is all fantastic. And it was really the launching point that moved that Midnight Road Warriors program into the next gear headed into Starrcade. In a lot of ways, and you can debate whether or not you thought this was a good thing or a bad thing at the time, but the Starrcade 86 main draw in the tag division was actually the program that didn't directly involve the belts. Because even though the Rock and Roll Express Minnesota Wrecking Crew match was the title program, the real draw for that event was the Midnights and the Road Warriors in the scaffold match. There were no belts involved there. This feud was so hot, it totally overshadowed the belts. And again, you can argue whether or not you thought that was a good thing or not, but just kind of the reality of it. So, oops. Jumped ahead a little too far in my notes here. Now I have to backtrack and figure out where I left off. Shoot. Sorry, folks. Live podcasting. Oh, okay, I found it. We had the Russians out for a promo next. God, I know I like to poke fun at Crusher Khrushchev any chance I get here, but my God, dude. Following a Jim Cornette promo with a Crusher Khrushchev promo. It's got to be like coming down from an acid trip. All the energy is just drained from the room. Again, no offense to Darso. I like Darso, but my God, his promos. Just never get over how boring they all were. I don't know. He's like kind of the epitome of somebody that you knew deep down was a really nice guy because he's just trying to portray an evil Russian and it just fails on all accounts. Anyway, he kind of touched on the tournament and said any of the top teams in the NWA could be beat at any point, any time. And the Road Warriors are a prime example of that. And then he very quickly passed the mic to Ivan, probably saying to himself, please God, get this microphone away from me. So Ivan jumped in here and kind of went over Nikita's whole story. He said that Nikita is the #1 contender to the world's title because he's the U.S. heavyweight champion. And after he beats Wahoo McDaniel in their unification match for the U.S. and national titles, There will be no doubt that nephew Nikita is the number one contender. Then Nikita added that all competition in the NWA will soon fall to the feet of the Russians. I also noted here, Nikita having fake sympathy for the Road Warriors. Classic heel move. So then we went to the Kansas Jayhawks versus Tony Zane and Pablo Crenshaw. I think this is the segment that I determined if there was one team that was super over on the Superstation this particular taping, it was Dirty Dutch and Hangman Bobby Jaggers. These people love them some Jayhawks here. They had a fun squash. People, for some reason, got really excited during a spot early on where Tony Zane went to do the drop-down spot on Dutch, and instead of Dutch jumping over him, he just stopped and kicked Tony in the side. Even Tony and David couldn't help but laugh at that. I'll also never get sick of the deal where you have guys cranking on a submission hold or working over a body part, and the studio crowd all chants in unison, "Break it, break it." In this case, it was Dutch working over Crenshaw's neck in a camel clutch. Indeed, chanting for Dutch to kill this man on live broadcast. Thankfully, the Jayhawks just hit Crenshaw with a double team move and pinned him. And then we immediately went to Dick Murdoch at the booth for a promo. Didn't really have a whole lot to say here, aside from promising that when it comes to the U.S. Tag Title Tournament, whether it is friend or foe, it doesn't matter who he and Ronnie Garvin have to stand across the ring from. Better team is going to come out the winner. Really, the only thing I took away from this whole promo was, wow, heel tease much? I actually don't remember a whole lot about Murdoch's run in the NWA around this point, headed into 87. So if it ends up turning out that Murdoch does go heel soon, at least I'll be able to trace it back to here as being the start of it. You know, especially when he's talking about Dusty as the TV champion and how there are going to be a lot of guys gunning for him in the future. May as well just throw up the red flag and say, caution, heel turn incoming. And speaking of the Devils, how's this for a TV main event? Captain Redneck and Ronnie Garvin squaring up against the Mulkey Brothers. They're alive. I thought the Midnights killed these guys on TV a few weeks ago in that angle, but here they are in the flesh, Randy and Bill. And I still can't tell which one's which. It's like me all these years later still trying to figure out which one of the Usos are Jimmy and Jay. But this is also the point in the show where the studio fans were just having a blast going into business for themselves with all the chants. There's a point early on here where Ronnie is in there stretching out one of the Mulkeys, and I couldn't figure out exactly what this woman said, but I believe it was something to the effect of her telling Ronnie to throw him around like a peanut butter ball. And this was met with the studio crowd all laughing in unison as if to say, what the fuck did this woman just tell Ronnie to do? I'll tell you, man, these studio crowds were hit and miss back in the day, but when they were hitting on all accounts. Throw him around like a peanut butter ball. The hell does that even mean? Must be a Southern thing. So, well, here's the entire layout of the match, basically. Garvin and Murdoch absolutely wrecked this one poor Mulkey brother for the entire match while the other stood on the apron, probably thinking to himself, thank God I'm not the one in there taking the beating right now. And after mauling this guy to and fro for a few minutes, Murdoch got the pin after the stalling brainbuster. I also noted the spot where Garvin pulled the Mulkey brother up to his feet by legitimately raking his back and essentially pulling him up by the skin. That sounds like no fun. And our final segment of the week was Wahoo McDaniel at the booth, hyping up the title unification match with him and Nikita in the Omni for the 28th. Really nothing to note about it, aside from him promising that he'll walk out victorious with both belts and be the next challenger to go up against Ric Flair for the World Heavyweight title, which, well, we all know didn't happen. And that was the show. Another 45-minute edition here on the Saturday Night Superstation. Really, the big takeaway from this one was the Midnight Road Warriors angle. You know, they spent a lot of time covering it and talking up the significance of the fact that it's the first time, really, where we've seen the Road Warriors in any kind of vulnerable state. You know, as noted before, you know, we've seen a few instances where, for example, the Horsemen would try and jump the Road Warriors on television in a post-match angle, or they temporarily get the upper hand on Hawk or Animal, but more often than not, Hawk and Animal would be right there to make their own comeback and stand tall by the end. But this is really the first time ever where we've seen the Road Warriors at any kind of actual disadvantage, you know, where one of their guys was taken out. And now that it's Hawk and Ellering left to fight from underneath with Animal out of the equation, now you wonder if the Road Warriors are actually going to be able to do something about it. It was methodically booked, and they really milked the gravity of the situation. In terms of everything else on the show, there wasn't a whole lot of noteworthy material to take away from it. Most of the TV stories are all still focused around the U.S. Tag Title Tournament in some way or form. That's fine. You know, and you still got other top programs being showcased and spotlighted. You know, Ric Flair's calling out Nikita every week, and once we wrap up the unification match with Nikita and Wahoo in a few weeks, that program will pretty much be set in stone. Even though, historically speaking, I don't think Nikita and Flair was the immediate direction they were going for Starrcade. I still think Magnum was slated for that title shot first before the unfortunate accident that ended his in-ring career, which coming up on relatively soon. I haven't forgot about that. But, yeah, man. Midnights and the Road Warriors. That is the big money feud around this point, and man, were the people hot for it. But moving along with things, we'll go to World Class Championship Wrestling from September 24th of the year 1983. We open with Buddy Roberts and Gentleman Chris Adams. Now, of course, one of the stories Mercer played up in this match was the recent American Heavyweight title match with him and Jimmy Garvin, where Garvin barely escaped with the belt after going to a 10-minute draw, after having promised to defend his belt every week on television like a fighting champion would. And after Adams pretty much beat him from pillar to post for about 10 minutes straight, Garvin got through without one match and decided, well, that ain't happening anymore. Overall, this is a perfectly fine opener. You know, at this stage, I don't really need to go into detail on what the Dallas crowd is chanting during Buddy Roberts matches, although they were super into the Baldy chants this week. Didn't really know a whole lot about the actual match. Wasn't really a whole lot to take away from it in terms of spots or angles. I do always appreciate Mercer referring to hip attack moves in wrestling as just flat out calling them butts. There's a point where Adams countered a waist lock and hit Buddy with his ass, and instead of just calling it a hip attack, he calls it a reverse butt. Which, I'm not exactly sure how you reverse a butt. Wouldn't that just be hitting someone with your cock instead? Unless he's talking about inverting the butt, which, in that case, sounds painful. They did a double bonk spot at one point where it looked like Buddy actually may have caught Adams in the lip because he came up and immediately started spitting blood. They also had a really creative heat spot here where Adams tried to go up to the top rope, but he ended up slipping and falling down. So, of course, he goes crashing down to the mat, and Buddy immediately takes advantage and starts working over his back. It's one of those deals where you can tell it was worked because he basically crotched himself intentionally on the top rope and sort of spilled back into the ring. But, I mean, you see so many guys fuck up top rope moves all the time now. They don't even bother selling it. So it made you wonder for a minute here. And eventually Adams made a small comeback at the end, but right when he tried to take it home with rolling up Buddy in various pinning predicaments, the time limit expired for the match. So they also went to a 10-minute Broadway. Really nothing more to add to it. That took us to this Coco Samoan versus Johnny Mantel match after the break. I didn't really know a whole lot about Coco before this segment. I'd heard the name before, but I mean, if you were to tell me to pinpoint the period and what territories he was primarily working, I'd totally be out to lunch. Most of the stuff I found, it looked like he was mainly working in the Portland area during the mid to late 80s, but it doesn't look like he branched out much beyond the Northwest region. He wasn't a bad worker. I'm surprised I haven't heard much of him. Of course, with the Samoan heritage, I guess I shouldn't be all that surprised. And that whole bloodline of talent has spawned nothing but great workers throughout wrestling history. Match was all right for what it was. Lots of Samoan chops. The finish saw Coco try for a body slam, but Mantel reversed it into a Russian leg sweep for the 3. Once again, really didn't have much to add beyond that. I don't know if Coco sticks around as a regular on world-class television, but I mean, if he ends up working more squash matches, I wouldn't mind it. For a big guy, too, he can move. You know, he reminded me a lot of Haku. Trust me, if there's a man of Samoan heritage whose matches I'll never get sick of, it's fucking Haku. Or the Barbarian. Or pretty much anything involving the Faces of Fear. I could watch tapes of them for hours and never get bored. Up next, we had... Oh, actually, in real time, what I saw next was the weirdest fucking commercial for State Farm. It was very unfunny, like most State Farm commercials are anymore. They hit a banger with Jake from State Farm years ago, and it's all been downhill since. Bummer. But getting back to the show, Terry Gordy wrestled Ken Johnson, and he looked like a Ken Johnson. A very generic pale job guy with bad hair and a beer gut. Also had a facial expression that I can describe in no other manner than calling it frumpy. He also had no idea how to hit the ropes, which is always epic. But aside from me poking fun at how awful Johnson was, Gordy mostly pummeled his ass. They did try to give Johnson a little bit at the end where he was giving Gordy some clubbing blows to the chest that Gordy didn't even sell. And then he just decked the guy with one right hand and dropped him like a sandbag. And then Gordy put the Oriental Spike on him, wherein after he finally released the hold, Johnson began having a spasm conniption on the mat while holding his neck. Or a convulsion, I guess would be a better term to put it. And Gordy stomped away on him for a few more seconds before just deciding to pin him anyway. And if you watched last week's show, they established the Oriental Spike as part of Gordy's offensive moveset. Even had him lay out Bruiser Brody to set the example of how lethal the hold was. So this was more about continuing to establish the Spike and putting Gordy over as a dangerous man, now that he has studied and mastered a fatal finishing move. And real briefly before the main event, Kevin Von Erich did a promo to basically put over that he is substituting in this match for David. And Mercer did touch on this at the beginning, where he talked about how David was originally scheduled to wrestle in the main event with Kerry, but Terry Gordy had put the Oriental Spike on David and hurt him, which evidently took him out of the match. So Kevin wanted to fill in as David's partner, and he got the approval of it, or he got the approval for it. According to Kevin, too, David is apparently only going to be gone for a few days. So maybe that choke isn't as lethal as we were led to believe, if he was only able to put the guy out of commission for a 2 to 3 day window. But, well, David's a fighter, too, so maybe Terry just picked the wrong guy to try to make an example out of. So we had the match. It's Kevin and Kerry versus Devastation Incorporated's representatives, the Mongol and Mr. Ebony. And this one's had a little bit of ongoing TV backstory. We've had several episodes where Skandar Ogbar has come out on World Class and called out the babyface locker room for being too weak and gutless to get in the ring with anyone from Devastation Inc. He'd been calling out the Von Erichs on occasion too. So they finally stepped up to the challenge and decided to wrestle Devastation Inc.'s lesser important crew, the prelim guys, for lack of better terms. In fact, now that I think of it, with the exception of Kamala, most of this faction is prelim. It hit me during the part of this match where Kerry and Mongol were doing the standoff test of strength. I realized, goddamn, Kerry's got some thick arms. Gives me inspiration to keep working hard at the gym, because I want arms and shoulders like that motherfucker had. Overall, it was a surprisingly fun match. They pretty much worked it with Kerry and Kevin dominating the action well into the halfway mark, and the heels managed to cut off the Von Erichs for a little bit of heat on Kerry after several run-in attempts and distractions, and they were able to keep Kerry isolated in the heel corner to keep the constant in-and-out tags going. They actually had an inadvertent slip-up here from Kerry where it looked like he was about ready to make his comeback on Ebony by running off the second rope and then hitting him with a crossbody attack, but Kerry ended up slipping on the turnbuckles, which Ebony covered for by immediately going on the attack again. But Kevin was eventually able to get the hot tag. Things finally broke down with all four guys at the end. Von Erichs ended up hitting Mongol with the double drop kick out to the floor. Then Kerry slammed Ebony in the middle of the ring, and Kevin landed the flying crossbody off the top rope for the 3. Good match. Nice ebb and flow throughout. Even if the Kerry botch was unintentional, they covered for it well and had the heels keep working him over for another minute or so before the big comeback. They also had a wacky little post-match deal where the heels tried to keep the attack going, but the Von Erichs were both trying to set up for the double Irish whip spot in the corner so they could send the heels bonking into one another. Only, I think Mongol didn't catch on to this at first because he had Kerry worked over in the opposite corner while Kevin was yelling for Kerry to set him up. So Kevin ends up leaving Ebony in the one corner so he could run over to probably tell Mongol that they're going to do the double bonk spot. So they whipped the heels from opposite corners and they took the cartoon pratfall spot onto the floor. Looked totally ridiculous, but I mean, the crowd liked it. But yeah, overall, I wouldn't say this was a particularly noteworthy episode. I was honestly kind of bored watching it, if I'm being honest. The main event was pretty good, but the other stuff was either squash material or small storyline advancement. Next week's featured match is Bruiser Brody versus Michael Hayes, which sounds like it'll be a joyous occasion. Getting to watch Hayes bump around like a pinball for Brody. That ought to be fun. But yeah, really nothing I'd say you have to go out of your way to watch or catch up on here. Pretty uneventful episode. But yeah, that is all I've got for this one. Didn't really have any kind of big outro planned here. AEW drama is still kind of at a stalling point. Nothing really to report on there. And they've obviously got a new creative direction they're headed in right now without Punk or the Elite in the picture. So whatever that direction is, it looks like Tony's just banking on not having to rely on them for the foreseeable future. Which, you know, I've talked about it for a couple weeks now, but it's probably a good thing. Just kind of let the cooler heads prevail and not really bring it up. I personally still don't see any monetary value in trying to make anything out of that in terms of a story beyond just letting it drift away and try to move past it. So until Monday, where we're back with the WWE side of things, make sure you guys all stop back to check out that show then. Take care all. Peace out.